Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Sheila Segerson, Director of Community Solutions at Maddie's Fund in Pleasanton, California. Next up is Leah Craig Chumbley, Executive Director at Brother Wolf Animal Rescue. Leah Craig will be talking about shifting organizational culture around behavioral euthanasia and communicating an organization's stance and decisions to stakeholder groups, including staff, volunteers, donors, the community, and others. After Leah Craig's presentation, we'll watch two short videos from Kristen Brown at Lynchburg Humane Society and Stephanie Bilbrow of Austin Pets Alive. And then we'll have time for Q&A with all three speakers. Welcome, Leah Craig.
Thank you. It's so great to be here with you all today. And I thank Maddie's Fund for putting all of this together. We are going to spend about the next 30 minutes talking about communicating behavioral euthanasia decisions to stakeholder groups in your organization. So I came into this role at Brother Wolf Animal Rescue. We're in Asheville, North Carolina here. And we had a new leadership team take over about 5 years ago. And to be honest with you, at that time, it was pure chaos when it came to euthanasia decisions at Brother Wolf. So we hadn't done any of the work at that time to set really clear expectations with our stakeholder groups, to put policies and procedures in place that we were following repeatedly. And we didn't have lines of transparent communication established with those stakeholder groups that they knew to rely on. Implementing these three things has been so transformational for our organization. We have moved out of that chaos and into something that is much more holistic for the people, the pets that we serve, and our community. So I hope that you're able to take away even nuggets of information from the next 30 minutes that will help you benefit your organization as well, no matter where you are on this arc of chaos to something very different and positive on the other side. So for us, it really started with understanding the need for change. And for me personally, there were a couple things that were happening at our organization 5 years ago that I just could not live with anymore. And we, as a leadership team, were all feeling this way. We can comfortably house about 32 dogs at Brother Wolf, depending on how many puppies are in the building. And 5 years ago, we had 16 dogs living in individual runs who had extreme histories of aggression. And they were basically being warehoused by the organization because they were long-term residents who didn't have a lot of outcome possibilities for them due to severe histories of aggression that we were very much aware of. So we had dogs who had been living with us for many, many months, and we had dogs that had also been living with us for many years. And it just wasn't okay with us because as we watched these animals, they were not doing well in that shelter environment. We are a converted warehouse shelter. So it's very loud, it's highly stressful. We put lots of our animals into foster homes. And if they're on the adoption floor, it's because we think they can go home in 2 weeks or less now. But animals used to live with us for years. And those animals were not adopted out very often, as there's not many adopters who were willing to take them on. Now, once in a while there were, of course, and the organization was practicing at that time placing animals with histories of aggression into homes. And so those animals did get adopted into homes sometimes. A lot of times, more often than not, something bad would take place in that home. And then the animal would come back because of the aggression incident and would resume living life in the shelter. They mostly had to be on a lot of behavioral modification medication to kind of survive that kind of life. And they were living in isolation primarily. These were not dogs who were safe to interact with most humans, and most of them were not dogs who were safe to interact with other dogs either. So they lived lives of mostly solitary confinement. If their person was at the shelter, then maybe they would get out for an hour a day. It just was not anything that we believed in. Like, we would never adopt a dog out to a home that said, I'm going to kennel this dog for 23 to 24 hours a day. Like, that would break our hearts. And this was breaking our hearts. And then on the other side of it, we were harming people in our community too, because we were placing dogs that we had big safety concerns about into homes, and then harmful things were happening in that homes. And we knew enough. We had these animals' histories of aggression. We'd known them for a long time. We wanted both of these practices to stop, and we wanted to learn how we could do things differently. So for us, it began with learning from the experts. We knew it was happening, and we wanted to see what the world could look like instead. So we engaged our leadership team and our board of directors as the starting point in this process. And we talked to tons of other people in animal welfare. We talked to you all and said, what's working for you? What's not? What have you tried? What's going well? We learned a lot from talking to other people in animal welfare. And then we engaged consultants. So we brought in 2 certified applied animal behaviorists. That was extremely important for us to learn from them, and also to have them review the files of the dogs who are already in our care and talk through those animals with us. It was so very helpful. We worked with Kelly Bolin and Trish McMillan. Their names and links to their websites are on the resources handout for this workshop if you'd like to contact them. Since then, we've also worked with veterinary behaviorists, and that's been a really positive experience for us as well. I would note that while we all love the dog trainers that enhance our work on a weekly basis and are integral to what we do in our life-saving work, it is wonderful when you're talking about these high levels of aggression and really making these hard decisions to engage someone like a certified applied animal behaviorist or a veterinary behaviorist who has that higher level of education in this area. We found that to be really beneficial, and to make sure that either one of those professionals has the experience in working with shelters in the past. You want to make sure that not only do they have the education, but they understand the shelter environment and what's the realities for you and your team and the animals that you're working with. So as we went through this process of education, really, we started to plan for change and envision the world that we wanted to create. So I often find that when you're facing huge problems, it can just be daunting and overwhelming to this problem solution focus, and it can get your brain in kind of like a negative space where there's not like a lot of freedom and thought and like creativity flowing, because it just like such a big problem and it almost insurmountable sometimes. So what could be really helpful and what we found to be good for our team was like, instead, to start with the goal in mind, to start envisioning the world that you want to create. We knew that we didn't want to continue some of the practices that we were doing as an organization. And through our education journey, we started to get super excited about the world we could create, like what we could do and how great that would be for so many animals that we love. So for us, a few things that spoke specifically to us, we did not want to warehouse animals in our shelter. We were so concerned about this poor quality of lives that they were experiencing. It really just was so heartbreaking to see them every day living a life that none of us would want for a dog that we loved. And so we did not want to continue that practice. We also wanted to do the most good for the greatest number of animals. So we're in North Carolina. North Carolina is the 3rd worst state in the entire country for the euthanasia numbers of shelter animals. That means that every week, over 550 animals are dying in North Carolina, a lot of them within a 2-hour radius of Brother Wolf. And it means that a lot of animals with no history of aggression are dying in shelters just because their time is up, they don't have room for them, or they don't have the money to pay for the veterinary care that that animal requires. And these are actually problems we can solve at Brother Wolf. We're so lucky to have resources to be able to provide veterinary care to our animals, even if that means something like surgery. We also are able to take in animals from our surrounding shelters to alleviate them needing to be euthanized simply because of time and space constraints. 60% of the animals that Brother Wolf takes in are from shelter. The majority of those partners are within 2 hours of where we are. So it's just so massively important to us to use our resources to save the greatest number of lives, because so many animals in our area are losing their lives needlessly every week. We also wanted to make safe adoption placements. We love our adopters, and we're pretty obsessed with the human-animal bond. So we want that to be a positive experience in both directions for those living beings. And we want to feel good about placing animals that we believe will be safe into our community. And not just for that one adopter, not just for that one house. Of course, that one house is of the utmost importance. But also, what is their neighbor experiencing because of that animal? What's their neighborhood experiencing? If they're taking that dog out into the community, how's that going to impact the community? We wanted, with the knowledge that we had about animals, to make safe placements. And we wanted to support shelter pets as a whole. It was horrible to watch those animals live in isolation, some for up to 5 years of their life. We also had a dog. He had lived on and off with us for 3 years. The last adoptive home that we placed that dog into, even though that dog had an extensive history of aggression, including aggression to children. At that time, it was very normal for us to see histories like that and still place the animal. We did also place the animal into a home with children. And within days, while that child was asleep, that dog landed multiple puncture wounds into that sleeping child's face. It was horrible. It was a horrible incident. And that story spread like wildfire. Of course it did. There's a little kid walking around with puncture wounds in his face and a plastic mask over it to keep infection out. So everyone at school is asking what happened, at church, at soccer practice. This just spreads throughout our community. And the story is, the shelter knew about the aggression, the shelter still placed, and something terrible happened. And that has a negative impact, not just for our shelter, which definitely it does, but it has a negative impact for shelter animals as a whole. Because if we are knowingly making those decisions, that might make other people hearing that story very scared to adopt. And after a while, the name of the shelter is not going to remain with that story. It's going to become a generalized story about a terrible event that happened, and they still might remember that it was a shelter animal. So we want to do the best we can for every shelter animal by making those responsible placements. It was time for us to create adaptability criteria. So this was so key to everything else that has happened since. If we had not this document, I don't know how we would have gotten to where we are today. So an adaptability criteria was a new term to me. I've been in animal welfare since the beginning of my career, and I only heard it for the first time 5 years ago. So if you've never heard it either, it is a document that has a guidelines for your organization to follow when you're presented with animals with specific behaviors. This is something that you create, so it's very specific to you, your organization, what you believe in, your community, the type of animals that you serve. It's very specific to you. It is very helpful to have these guidelines and talk through what you might do as far as pathway planning for animals when you see certain behaviors. And to be clear, this is not a document that just lists all the reasons you euthanize animals. That's not what this document is at all. It lists a bunch of different behaviors that we encounter in dogs and cats in our populations, and then different pathways that we would try when we encounter those behaviors. We still treat every animal as an individual, so we're reviewing everything about that animal. We're taking data from every source we possibly can. You know, if there was a past caregiver, if there's a foster home, volunteer interaction, staff interaction, any information we have, we're reviewing everything, and we're spending time talking about each animal as an individual. We don't count fluke aggression incidents. So that would be something like an animal's waking up from anesthesia and lands a bite, or you just transferred in mom puppies. She recently had the puppies. She's going through change. She's very stressed out. She lands a minor bite to a volunteer. That's not something we're going to hold against her. So we call those fluke aggression incidents, and we don't include those. And ultimately, it's really going to be personal for you. So if you want to take a look at, we've put together a worksheet that kind of can help your team like start having these conversations. Now, we did ours in tandem with Trish McMillan, certified applied animal behaviorist. And I absolutely think that you need an outside professional to do this with you. It's just so helpful to have not only their expertise, but also their facilitation of the process. So Trish was able to walk us through this process, have a lot of conversations with our team, and come to an adoptability criteria that felt good for us, our organization, and our community. So the worksheet that we put together, which is in the resources for this workshop, if you want to start having those conversations as a team, the worksheet kind of just talks you through like a bunch of different behaviors to discuss as a team. And it could be a good starting point for you if you're interested in that. So our team at this point, we have identified what we don't want to keep happening at our organization. We've started to dream about the world that we could create instead. And we've gotten a lot of education from professionals in this area. And we've even worked with those professionals to create an adoptability criteria. So now it's time for us to share our education and our policy changes with our other stakeholder groups. We started with all of our staff members, and it was so key for us to make sure that we gave people the opportunity to go through the same journey that we did. We went on a big education experience, and that changed a lot of our perceptions of things. And so it's so important to us for not like just like top down management to say, you know, these are our new policies and procedures. This is how we're going to move forward. Like give people the opportunity to go along the same path that you did and really bringing that education to them so that they can make their own decisions. With all of our staff members together at one time, we were able to share all of the information to everyone at the same time. And we were also very open to dialogue in that in-person meeting as well. With our major donors, Brother Wolf was going through a lot of changes at this time. We had this new leadership team, so several things in the organization were changing. And so we had one-on-one sit-downs with our major donors and talked through like where we were, what we wanted to change, the world that we could create together. And we wanted to bring them on that journey of why this was so important, really underscoring the why behind everything, because the why shows the care, it shows the intentionality, it shows the dream and the vision. And so bringing people along with that why shows that you also care about them, that you respect them, and you want to give them the opportunity to have the information and make their own decisions. With our volunteers and fosters, we brought them all together for an in-person meeting, as many people as possible, again, to give the same information at the same time. And with our community, we wanted to give all the information to them, but it was really challenging. Like, how the heck are we going to give all of this to our whole community? So we wrote a really long blog article. It is long, but it has everything that we wanted to say in it. And there was really nothing that we could leave out because this process had been so important for us to get here. So there's a long form blog on Brother Wolf's website that kind of talks about this whole transition for us. If you're interested in reading that, there's a link to it on the resources for this workshop. Then with our adopters, we embraced transparency, and we created a shortened version of our adoptability criteria, and we put that right on our website. So you can find that on Brother Wolf's website in two places right now. You can find it on a page that talks about our philosophy, and you can find it on our adoption information page. So obviously a general adoption information page is a page that is accessed quite frequently by adopters. And what's really cool is that adopters actually come to us now because we are transparent and because we have an adoptability criteria, especially people who have heard horror stories in the past, or maybe they were injured by a dog as a child, or maybe even their child in their home has been injured by a dog in the past. They have a lot of fear around a potential incident of aggression. And so it's been neat to see like that transparency has actually brought adopters into the door and maybe kept them out of getting pets from other sources. Overall, you're going to have some hard conversations, right? It really depends on how big of a shift this is for your organization. For us, it was a big shift. In your organization, wherever you decide to go and wherever you are right now, those two things might not be that far apart. But it's an emotional topic, right? It's an emotional topic within our organization. So of course it is for our volunteers and our fosters and our donors and our community. And so just really trying to hold yourself to the best of circumstances in your own behavior as you walk through this. Meeting people with empathy and kindness and as much understanding as you can muster is just so helpful and sets such a high bar for the rest of your team. Setting that example will make such a difference as you walk through this. So we were ready to now take steps with our adaptability criteria in hand. We had told people that we were going to implement change. We had told them the reasons behind it. We had hopefully given them some hope with the world that we wanted to create. And now we needed to implement our policies. So it was important for us to update our intake protocols. And I know not every shelter can do this. If you have county contracts, you might have your hands tied in certain ways. We choose which animals come into our doors at Brother Wolf. We don't have a county contract, so we were able to update all of our intake protocols. The reason we did this, of course, is because we want to make sure that the animals we're taking in are animals we can actually serve. And so it was important to change our intake protocols to match that adaptability criteria. We talked with our source shelters to make sure that they knew that we now had this adaptability criteria and that we were working together to send animals to Brother Wolf who could be served by Brother Wolf. And with our owner surrenders, we take 40% of our animals in from community members here. So if we get an owner surrender request, and these are animals who've not been adopted from Brother Wolf, so they've never been to Brother Wolf before, they're living in our community and we get an owner surrender request. If the reason for that request is because of a horrible incident of aggression that happened in that home, that we are very clear with that person that this animal would be a behavioral euthanasia outcome. And we just want to be transparent as to the reason we are not accepting that animal into our care, because the majority of the people who are in those situations, we find, they've never even heard the word behavioral euthanasia. They've never had a conversation with someone about that. They are freaked out. They are spiraling. A lot of them have been held hostage for years by this situation. And they are, not all of them, but a lot of them, they welcome a conversation with a compassionate animal welfare professional about euthanasia and why, as an animal welfare organization, if that animal was in our care under our ownership, and that incident happens, say, in a foster home, and it's an egregious incident, maybe that, they've told us about, then we want to let them know, like, this is what choice we would make in that case. Again, it's that educational experience and sharing that with your community and hopefully enhancing your community, doing the most good for the greatest number of animals and helping people who are struggling. We implemented weekly animal care and support team meetings. So there's 8 people at Brother Wolf who go to these. We have a staff of 32, so 8's a pretty large representation. Those 8 people are from throughout the organization. I'm included in that meeting. And so we meet every week and we talk about every animal in our care who's struggling. They could be struggling because they need marketing help to get out of the building. They could have test results that we're talking about as a team with veterinary information that's come our way. Or maybe there was a really bad incident that happened in a foster home or in the play yard over the weekend, an incident of aggression that we need to talk through as a team, and we need to understand fully what happened so that we can appropriately pathway plan for that animal. So we do that every week, and that is the team that makes euthanasia decisions. And once we had those things in place, we knew that it was time now to implement the hardest part of it and saying goodbye to the animals who were then in our care, but did not meet our adoptability criteria because we did not want them to live a life in a shelter. So once we had moved through implementing that adoptability criteria, we wanted to ensure that euthanasia decisions in the future had clear policies and procedures for how those were being communicated. This was so great for every stakeholder group because they need to know, like, what are you going to do in that situation? How do I find out? Who do I ask questions to? So all of these communications always underscore our adoptability criteria. So we're always looping back to that so they understand, oh, right, they've told me this is how they operate. They have an adoptability criteria. This is why this decision has been made. For our staff, we tell them the same day the euthanasia is taking place. So every morning at Brother Wolf, no matter what's happening that day, there's a 15-minute like group huddle with everyone who gets here first thing in the morning just to say like, this is what's coming up this day. And if a euthanasia decision has been made that is going to be carried out that day, then we will talk about it face to face with the team members who are there. So we'll talk about the animal's whole history with the organization. We'll tell them all the different things that we've tried to be successful with caring for this animal, the things that we have tried to put in place to move them to adoption, and the barriers that have happened that have kept us from being able to do so. And ultimately, all of the reasons why we've made the decision. We'll also give them guidance on whether or not the animal is safe for them to interact with. And we want to do whatever we can, interaction or not interaction, to make that animal's last day a great day. And so we really encourage our team members to be a part of doing that for the animal in whichever way is safe to do that. With adoption returns, so say they're, we adopted a dog out 2 years ago, and that adopter calls us and is saying, hey, this terrible incident took place, and they're just telling us a horrendous story. And we know from that one conversation, because it's horrendous, that if this animal, is transferred back into our care from that adopter, that behavioral euthanasia is going to be the pathway based on our adoptability criteria. So we're transparent with them about that. We are not transparent with them about it in a bullying way. We just want them to know what will happen. And we're very much like, we believe in this decision, like we want you to know that if the animal comes back to our care, this would be our decision, because we believe now that this animal is too dangerous to place into a home based on this horrible event that has happened in your home. And we don't want other community members to suffer. Some people really understand that. Some people don't. But us giving them that level of transparency and information matters to us. If they are open to it, and if the animal has been in their home for a long time, that might be 8 months, that might be multiple years, we know that the least stressful option, as long as it's safe, given that it's safe, of course, but if it is safe, the least stressful option for that animal is to say goodbye surrounded by the family it knows and the love of that home. So we will pay an outside veterinary behaviorist, a veterinary professional, who will go to the adoptive home and perform humane euthanasia at that home. And we believe that that is the best thing for that animal versus bringing that animal back to the shelter and having that animal go through all of that stress. Now, of course, we'll always take the animal back, and a lot of people are not willing to have the behavioral euthanasia happen in their home. They want it. They want the behavioral euthanasia to occur at the shelter, and they will bring the animal back, and that's okay. But I think that we're making incremental change in our community with having these conversations, and the animals that are able to pass peacefully, surrounded by the love of their family, that just means so much to us and to the family. And, you feel quite guilty when these things happen, even though you don't know, these are animals you could have never predicted usually, like even maybe a puppy they adopted. But you still feel that level of guilt, like when a family is negatively impacted by an animal that you adopted into that home. And so we want to just support them however we can. If it's a foster family, we're very transparent. If the incident took place in the home, we'll tell them that the outcome was euthanasia. And of course, if a foster family who knew that animal ever asked us, we would be very honest about it. Shelter partners, it really varies depending on the partner, but we're open to however they really want to handle it. If they want us to let them know or not, we'll do whatever they would like. With our volunteers, if we have a volunteer who's particularly close to an animal, we will notify them, and that's usually done in person or by phone. It's just so much better to have those conversations like human to human instead of computer to computer. We find it's much more effective. Our board of directors, they get updates on the outcomes of all animals in our care as far as statistically at every board meeting. So you've gone through all this work. Now it's so important to set expectations moving forward with your stakeholder groups to create success for everyone. We start right from the beginning. If you interview at Brother Wolf, you have a conversation about behavioral euthanasia. And sometimes that's alarming to people because we have live outcomes here for 96% of the animals in our care because we do get to choose who comes in our doors. Behavioral euthanasia is only 2% of the outcomes at Brother Wolf every year. But we know that 2% can throw things into complete chaos on every level of the organization if we don't have these key components in place. And setting expectations is a big key component. So we talk very openly and honestly. We share our adaptability criteria with people before they join our organization so that they have the time to think about it, take in the information, and decide if it's in alignment with them or not. I'd much rather have someone say, I'm not sure that I align with this. I don't think this is for me in the very beginning than 6 months down the road. And you can help facilitate that through transparency. We do a new employee orientation at about 100 days of staff members being with us. And that has been critical. So during that orientation, we go through a lot of information, our mission, our history, the landscape of animal welfare in the United States. We go back to the 1800s. We talk about, just this awesome sector and all the things that all these good people accomplish and how incredible the world has become for animals since, 1950. And so that orientation is a great chance to give them a lot of education, including the reasons behind behavioral euthanasia decisions. And this is where we are able to walk new staff through that same education process. So they're getting pieces and bits of it, of course, in their first 100 days, but they're more so focused on like learning their job, in those 100 days usually, and they kind of have their head down to that. So I find it's better that around the 100-day mark, their brains have space again to take in some more information, and we can really dive into this and expose them to the why, the reasons. This is why we make the decisions. And that is so helpful and also creates chains of open communication between leaders in the organization and every staff member to talk about difficult conversations. So we do an orientation with our fosters, our volunteers, and our board members, except their orientations are before they ever start serving our organization in those capacities. So before they start, they go through that same process. They're learning the whys behind the decisions that we make here. They're learning the whys behind the programs that we run. They're learning a lot in these orientations, and then can determine, like, is this an organization that I align with, or is it not an organization I align with? And having those decisions in the beginning and setting those clear expectations has just it's made a world of a difference for us. Lastly, I just want to say, while no matter where you are on the arc of this journey, I know it can be difficult. It's no one's favorite topic, and nobody wants to really be the one to, charge out there and say, this is how we're doing things with behavioral euthanasia when it comes to our organization. I get it. It's a challenging topic, but you can do this because you're animal welfare professionals. We can do anything. And because you are going to believe so deeply in that world that you want to create. Having your eye on the goodness that is going to exist when you are on the other side of this for the animals in your care, for the people who are engaged with your organization, for the mission that you serve, all of that is going to be so enhanced. That's what we have found, at least. And celebrate on the other side. put that celebration in. You've gone through some hard conversations, maybe some hard times to get here. What is that world you wanted to create? What is that goodness? Is your length of stay down? Are your adoptions up? Are you taking in more transfers in from other shelters where those animals would have never made it out alive? What are the good things that you can celebrate on the other end, and make sure that you're infusing your team with that constantly? It is so beneficial to their joy in a day. And it also underscores why it's so important to make the hard decisions. So we would love to talk more with you about this. Maddie's Fund has been fantastic in working with us to do 3 follow-up workshops on this topic. Our team is going to dive into the different stakeholder group and really sussing out like what we do with these groups and how it has greatly benefited us in this area. So we hope you will join us. Those orientations that we do are so pivotal, and I would love to tell you more about them. My email is also up on the screen. Reaching out to me individually. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I look forward to seeing you in the Q&A.
Thank you, Leah Craig. We have some great questions in the Q&A box. Please keep them coming. We'll get to them after these next short presentations. Let's hear from Kristen Brown of Lynchburg Humane Society and Stephanie Bilbrow of Austin Pets Alive.
Hi everyone, my name is Kristen Brown. I'm the Pet Health and Behavior Manager at the Lynchburg Humane Society in Lynchburg, Virginia. We are a private nonprofit organization with a contract with the city, and we have anywhere from 80 to 120 dogs in our care at a time. Over the past 2 years, we've been working really hard to update our approach to behavior euthanasia decisions to make the process more objective and holistic in its considerations for safely placing the pet into the community. So I was hoping to share some of those changes with you today. Before we started this process, our behavior euthanasia decision-making was oriented around our local animal control and the dangerous dog laws. While these guidelines are helpful to consider, they did not include other important factors like our capacity to care for the pet, the quality of life of the pet, or what to do if it was an outside of jurisdiction situation where the incident or the concerning behavior happened outside of our local animal control. So we wanted to update it to make sure that it was holistic in all of its considerations. One of the biggest changes that we made was utilizing this form, which there are a couple iterations of this form depending on the severity of the bite or the behavior concern. This form was developed by Dr. Sheila Sagerson from Maddie's Fund, and it just helps serve as a guide so that we can work through assessing the pet objectively, considering our capacity for care, and considering everything that would go into safely placing the pet into the community. So the form will never facilitate a perfect black and white decision, but it is an extremely helpful guide for us to make sure that we're not missing anything and that we're approaching every situation fairly to make sure that we're not overlooking certain aspects that would go into safely placing this pet. Another really important thing about this form is that it doesn't just help us make behavior euthanasia decisions, it also helps us see who we do have the capacity to care for and who we don't need to be as concerned about as we once were when we weren't looking at this as objectively. The example that I have is Titan. So he came into our care as a large Rottweiler with a little bit of sensitivity towards strangers. We were able to use this form and see that we really didn't need to be as concerned about Titan as we were at one point, and we did have the capacity to safely place him. So that photo on the right there is Titan in his boat with his dad on a fishing trip in his adoptive home. So we were able to find happiness for Titan because we were able to objectively assess him and our capacity to provide for his needs. Another major change that we made was how we communicate about this process. So the conversation starts with our executive director, our senior manager of operations, and myself. Once we come to an agreement, we then present it to our other directors and the managers of each department just to get their thoughts, feedback. There's always room for disagreement. Again, these are very emotional decisions, and we want to make sure that we are considering all possible outcomes for the pet and we're not missing or overlooking any details or opportunities for them. After that, per our staff's request, we will hold an all-staff meeting in person to discuss it as a group. Again, we're always open to their feedback, their suggestions, their questions, their comments. We want it to be a very transparent conversation so that they have the opportunity to contribute and advocate for the pets. We can't always do what they're asking for, but we can at least consider what they're saying and be open-minded to their suggestions while also productively driving these conversations. After that, I hold office hours, so our staff have structured time where they can come talk to me about these decisions. And we have an open door policy, so all of our leaders are always open to continuing to have these conversations. We found that that's an important part about maintaining transparency while keeping these conversations productive, because it's a sad situation for everybody and we don't need to contribute anything unproductive to them. We want everybody to feel included in the process and like they have something to contribute to it and an opportunity to advocate for the pets that they love so dearly. This process will always be changing for us. We're always going to be looking for more ways to improve, but I hope that this was helpful. And if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me.
Hi there, my name is Stephanie Bilbrow. I'm the Director of Operations here at Austin Pets Live in Austin, Texas. I'm here today to share some information with you about the internal communication protocol that we use here at APA when we're informing staff and volunteers about our behavior euthanasia decisions. We know that our staff and volunteers become very invested in the animals in our care, and that euthanasias and deaths can hit as hard as if it was their own personal pet. It might seem impersonal at first to have an official written protocol for something like this, but we have found that it actually helps a lot with those who are responsible for sending out the communication so that they don't forget anything or anybody in the process, even when they themselves may be feeling not 100%. This personal investment from staff and volunteers is one of the main reasons that we believe a protocol is needed. We do want to be transparent with them about the animals that they are caring for every single day, and we want to ensure that they're getting the communication directly from our leadership team. This also helps keep any misinformation or rumors from going around. Because we have a committee-style process for our behavior cases, these decisions are usually not a surprise by the time we get to this point in the process, but we do still want the communication to be consistent and timely, especially for planned euthanasias where friends may want to spend time with the dog ahead of time, or for cases where decisions had to be made quickly due to safety concerns. If we delay too long and people find out much later or through unofficial channels, it can leave them really feeling left out of the process, which makes the grieving that much more difficult. Though we are talking primarily about behavior euthanasia today, I want to note that we use this same process in other cases. For example, when there is a medical or quality of life euthanasia, when a dog dies unexpectedly in our care, or is diagnosed with a terminal illness and becomes a hospice case. I have also called out long stay dogs here because in most of these other cases, we are following this for dogs who have been with us for some time and are more likely to have a lot of friends among our staff and volunteers. Because at APA, we are dealing with a lot of medical emergencies on a daily basis. We just don't want to overwhelm people with daily notifications about animals that maybe they never even met. There is a standard format that we typically use when writing these notifications, though it is up to the individual how much color they want to add. I know this can be difficult for some people, especially if writing is not a big strength. So I did include a few sample communications in the resource documents in case they're helpful for anyone. To start, we always include a picture of the dog to connect their face to their story. We want to be reminded that they are an individual and they are loved. Then we are sharing the dog's overall history with us, including a summary of their behavior concerns or incidents that led to the euthanasia decision. Again, many people will already know this information, but we do want to include it for anyone that's new to their story. We also make sure to include positive details about the dog's personality, since these are the reasons people fell in love with them in the first place, and we do want to remember the good things. And then if euthanasia has not already happened, we do share the timeline and whether or not the dog could be visited before then. The where has probably been the piece of this protocol that we've tweaked the most over the years. With so many people to consider and so many different channels that could be used, we try to balance reaching as many people as possible with having a reasonable workload for the staff who is responsible for this process. As of now, we use 3 main avenues. We use a staff-only email group, we use an opt-in volunteer email group, and then we use a private Facebook page for staff and volunteers that was created just for this purpose. Note that these channels are all opt-in, since there are some people who don't want to get any notifications at all, and we do want to be respectful of that. Finally, I want to share a few considerations and tips that we always try to keep in mind and will hopefully help you in implementing a protocol of your own. When writing the notification, we try to be conscious of the types of details that we share around the case. We avoid sharing anything especially gruesome or unnecessarily upsetting. We also don't allow for assumptions or any personal speculation to be included about the case or the cause of death. And of course, always keep in mind that just because you are sending this internally, it doesn't mean that it will stay internal. I don't say this to discourage you from having this communication, but just as a reminder that it is important to make sure that you're only sharing factual information, that you are not blaming or pointing fingers, and that you are being compassionate in your communication. I really hope this information helps some of you start or improve your own protocol for communication around behavioral euthanasias. Please feel free to reach out to me if there are any questions. I know it can feel really scary to start something like this if you are not already doing it, but I guarantee that your staff and volunteers will be so happy and supportive of your efforts to be more open with them. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Leah Craig, Kristen, and Stephanie. I appreciate your willingness to talk about this difficult topic. Let's get to some questions from our audience. Our first question is, what is your definition of warehousing dogs? Is it related to length of stay? Leah Craig, why don't you take that one first, since you talked about it in your presentation?
We don't euthanize ever for length of stay at Brother Wolf. Our concern when we would use the word 5 years ago that we felt like we were warehousing dogs was because those dogs had severe histories of aggression that we knew about. And so there really wasn't an option once we have that adoptability criteria to move forward with placing those animals into homes because the histories were so severe. In the past, the organization had seen those severe histories and not made the behavioral euthanasia decision and kind of just kept the dog there. And so it was important for us, like if we had the information to know that a dog is not safe to put in a home, then the most humane next step for that animal is behavioral euthanasia. That's what we believe.
Awesome. Thank you. I see Stephanie and Kristen nodding, so it sounds like you feel similar there. Our next question is one of our most upvoted questions, and it is, how do you decide what is considered a fluke? And I'm going to give you an example of a fluke. 20 years ago, I had a dog that I had adopted with a fractured leg. I was carrying him outside. He bit me on the face. I had to go to the emergency for it. He never, ever bit me again. Lived 17 years. Fluke. Question is, I think there's a temptation as a shelter worker to write off a bite as a fluke, whether or not it really is. Also, what if the fluke incident leads to serious physical damage? Is that still left out of the equation?
We have a definition section within our adoptability criteria. And I believe the worksheet that we uploaded for Maddie's Fund includes those definitions, but you're welcome to reach out to me if it does not. And so having the fluke aggression incident, talked about as like, this is what it means to us. We give specific examples in there. And so it really leads the team to understand it in the way that Sheila was talking about it. Like, that makes sense. That animal was injured. He's in pain. Like, that is a fluke incident because of the pain, and the injury is because of the veterinary situation of the animal. And so we do have those definitions within the adoptability criteria that serve as keep that in regulation, I think. Yeah.
All right, Stephanie or Kristen, anything to add there? All right, great. Our next question is, what considerations are made for dogs who do not have a documented history of aggression, but have a long length of stay? And this person said 1 year plus, but obviously that can be different for everyone. Large and wary of strangers, but no aggressive incidents.
I don't want to be the only one talking, but in our situation, that never happens. It just doesn't. Like we're lucky to be in a community that our average length of stay is 2 weeks. And so once an animal is ready to go into adoptive home, they're usually in that adoptive home with 2.5 weeks or less. And so it just doesn't happen. The reason that animals stay a really long time is because there's something critically wrong. Now, sometimes we have hospice pets, of course, but that's entirely different. And we know from the start when we make that animal a hospice pet, we might have them with us for a while. And, then of course, those hospice pets always end up living for like 4 years, which is great. But we just don't have animals anymore who we wouldn't be able to move into an adoptive home in weeks or months. It just doesn't happen.
Stephanie or Kristen?
Yeah, I was just going to say we are never really talking about behavior euthanasia if we're, just looking at a fearful dog, regardless of their length of stay. So really what we're going to be doing at that point is figuring out how do we get them out of the shelter, whether it's into a foster home or into, potentially a rescue with other resources, or, we'll start looking at outcome pathways for them that aren't euthanasia. Because if they're just fearful behavior is not considered an unsafe behavior for us in any way.
I would like to add also, my organization does struggle with longer average length of stay, and we're working to decrease it. That's kind of where we're putting more of the focus than looking for reasons to be more concerned about the pets. It's more us assuming responsibility for the length of stay than putting that back on the pets who are staying too long. The only thing we would consider is a dramatic decline in quality of life, but the first steps there are always exhausting adoption and foster opportunities for those pets, including like previous owners, possibility of transport, which I know is kind of tricky for those longer stay pets, but we still try anyway. So really, really rare cases of pets who are stuck for a long time and dealing with severe quality of life decline.
Thank you. And that's part of why the next two presentations are so important for this conversation today, because it's all about getting them out, because it's so important and it involves all our teams working together, right? Not just behavior. All right. Next question looks like it's specifically for Leah Craig. Is there a reason why you tell staff the same day of a euthanasia instead of giving them a few days to process, prepare, and ask questions, or let them know that the euthanasia is even being considered?
Most of the time, our team is very aware that euthanasia is being considered because they know the policies that the organization follows. And, if you see like an animal come back in an animal control truck and that there's a very dramatic story about like what happened with that animal, they know that conversation is going to at least talk about the option of behavioral euthanasia, like when it's a really severe incident that story is being passed around. We find that for the majority of our staff, it causes them less emotional distress to find out on the day of euthanasia. So it's a hard policy to come up with, right? Because you're trying to take care of a lot of different things. But this is working for us, and our staff is telling us that it's good for them. And so we've stuck with it. We came up with the policy in tandem with them, and it is going well. So we have stuck with that. And it is then optional for people to know, like, oh, on my day off, like I could check my email or I could not check my email. They know that email is going to hit their inbox between 9 and 9:30 if that's happening. And so our staff is very much like in partnership with us in walking these roads. And so this is just what we've come up with that works for our population.
Thank you. Our last question, we're just about out of time, but is for Stephanie. And that is, when do new volunteers learn about the death notification protocol? So when in the process of bringing someone on board, when do they learn about it and how do you talk to them about it?
So we worked with our volunteer team to build this protocol. And so we have multiple levels of dog handling training that our volunteers go through. And so there's a level after which they're notified that this group exists and that they can get these notifications. We chose that level because that's typically where you start to get into the dogs that are harder to handle and are becoming long stay dogs, and they're the more likely group to be the ones potentially meeting and handling those dogs. We don't want to a first day volunteer go, hey, do you want to hear about all this bad news from us? So we have, I think it's like our third level of handling training is when people get that option. And then what was the second part of that?
I think we're out of time, so I think we'll end it there.
Yep.
That was a great
We'll go
answer.
to the forum.
Yeah, thank you. We'll answer the rest on the forum. So lots of questions we didn't get to. They'll all be answered on Maddie's Pet Forum. Leah Craig, Kristen, Stephanie, thank you so much for sharing your work with us.